A key part of a doctoral program is actually writing what's called the dissertation. Now, it doesn't matter whether you do a degree, a PhD in England or in New Zealand or in the United States, it really doesn't matter. Every PhD is going to have a dissertation connected with it. This is that key piece of research that a person with a terminal degree needs to be able to produce to be considered somebody who can do research. So this is a question then of, well, what is a dissertation? What are the requirements for a dissertation? How much thinking do you have to do for a dissertation? And so on and so forth. So in this video, Frank and I, again, we sit down and we talk about the dissertation process, we talk about the distinctions between a dissertation and a thesis, and we will explain all of that, as well as what is a defense of a dissertation and things of those like. Well, let's just get into it. Let's talk about the dissertation. Tell me, Frank, what is a dissertation? Let's just ask that question to start with. And what's the difference between a dissertation and a thesis?
It depends what country you're in, I think, right? In Europe, it's called a thesis, right?
Yeah.
Here, in America, it's called a dissertation. Now, at the master's level in America, they're called a thesis, right? So, but the dissertation is generally considered to be that PhD level research paper. And that's really what it is, except it's a research paper that's really a book. Because a dissertation isn't just a paper with sections, which you'll write at the master's level, for many classes. And of course, as you get into the upper level master's classes, you'll write longer and longer papers, 20 pages long, 25 pages long. If you pursue a Master of Theology, which is a terminal degree, it's not just a master's in theology, it's a THM, a Master of Theology. Now, that's a dedicated degree that's research academic based, and that still produces a thesis, but that thesis could be 50, 75 or more pages long.
When I was thinking about THMs, at Master's Seminary where I did my MDiv, the requirement there for a THM was 120 pages, I think it was. But the problem was that I couldn't do a THM there because the program I ended up doing at Southern, that included a THM in the PhD process. And of course, I couldn't skip that if I did the THM at Masters as well. They just wouldn't accept that as valid enough. So I'd have to do two THMs. Right. And so I wasn't going to spend 2 years at Masters. As much as I loved Masters, I couldn't justify spending 2 more years in the United States doing a THM there just so I could do another THM in my 4-year doctoral program.
Right.
But yeah,
that's similar to like what people who consider going to Dallas Theological Seminary, right?
Yeah.
To get an MDiv. Well, you can't get a Master of Divinity at Dallas Theological Seminary. They have a 4-year program, which is really a 3-year Master's of Divinity, and then you go the extra year and you get a Master of Theology. And if you already have a Master of Divinity from another seminary, you can't just go to Dallas Theological Seminary and say, "Hey, I got 3 out of 4 done." Yeah. No, they don't do it that way. They actually offer a separate degree for people who are in that situation, but it's not the THM from Dallas. So yeah, that mixing and matching between seminaries can sometimes be difficult, and it will drive your choices as to where to pursue your studies.
Yeah.
So anyway, the dissertation then is the dissertation then above and beyond that is now not just a research paper or even a long research paper. It's literally a book, because you've got chapters in it, and you're usually at the 200 to 300 page level, depending on what the requirements word wise are at your seminary and in your program. But I think the requirements at Columbia Biblical Seminary, if I don't get them wrong, they're between 90 and 110,000 words is the requirement. So that's going to pan out to be about 200 and something pages usually.
Yeah.
So
we had
that's the ultimate. This is the ultimate research product, if you will, that says to everybody, I can do research and I can express the result of my research and my thesis intelligently, academically. I backed it up. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Let me just interrupt the flow of this conversation again, just to say, if you're getting value out of this video at all, would you consider hitting the like button for us? It really helps us to help this video get found, and it helps the YouTube algorithm. So we really appreciate it. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that button. We'll be very thankful for that. Let's get back to it. Ours was around about, we were encouraged to aim for about 200 pages. We could go longer, but a minimum of 200. But the professors really didn't. I think there's so many doctoral dissertations they have to read that they encourage you not to go too much over, because then they have to read it, and that becomes part of the challenge. So it's not an insignificant amount of writing. It's not an insignificant amount of reading. And yeah, there is a structure to the dissertation as well. So it's not just, just start writing however you want. There's got to be a really clear thesis statement. So for ours, we had to propose a title. And the title then, and that thesis statement then went to a committee which was made up of all the faculty, and your supervisor presented the thesis and the title, and then the faculty would vote on whether that was worthy to be written on even. So they would actually look at that and say, is this a subject that's actually worth spending the kind of time that we're talking about here thinking through? And so you've got to get that right. There was a lot of time went into that from my part particularly. So when someone says, what was your dissertation about? And you can just sort of glibly sort of say what it was about. But behind that, there's actually a very specific title plus a thesis statement, which the thesis statement is, here's what I'm actually going to tell you over the course of the next 200 or so pages. That piece will actually be, it could be a paragraph, a small paragraph, and that paragraph will end up being early in your introduction or that first chapter of your dissertation. So you're very clear about, this is where we're going, this is what we're talking about. So again, it's part of that process as well. And then there are normally 5 or perhaps 6 chapters within the dissertation itself. You have to lay some groundwork. You have to talk about what you're arguing against. And then you have to explain, provide some of the basic building blocks that you're going to be working with to build that, that direction you're going in. And in the last chapter, at least for me, the last chapter had to be a chapter where we were talking about, here's the implications of this research from a practical perspective. Was that similar for you, Frank?
Yeah, very similar. So we have, of course, an introduction that would start it and a conclusion that'll finish it. Mm. But then between those two, we have we developed during the proposal process, we developed this, what's in every chapter kind of thing. But you're right, there's an expected framework to stay within. And so, for instance, my first chapter is about current research and past research in my area of study. Mm. And so we want to look at what's already been said about this topic. Mm. And then there's another chapter regarding methodology. So how are we going to study this area, and in what means, what tools, what ways are we going to study this? And there can be a lot of different methodologies that are used. And then you get into the meat, right? Then you probably get 3 or 4 more chapters of the actual study of whatever it is you're researching. And eventually then at the end, you have to wrap it all up and make your point. And hopefully your point at the end has supported your thesis from the start. Mm. So that's a real basic framework that I think most all dissertations, your PhD advisors are going to insist that's the form they take. Yeah.
And I think from the only variation from my limited understanding of it between the American and English approaches is that the English dissertation may be a little bit longer, maybe 300 or so pages. And part of the reason for that is you don't have those classes, and so therefore you've got a little bit more time to spend. So for the dissertation process that you have an English PhD, 3-year program, 3 years to write your dissertation, essentially. I mean, you're going to be doing research for some of that as well. But for what we do in the American side of things, we ended up, I think I had about 18 months, and I had my comprehensive exams in there as well. So the first 6 of that was preparing the dissertation topic and title, putting together the framework, the outline of the whole thing, chapter by chapter, getting that before my professor. So that was the proposal sort of stage. And then, so that was 1 semester, and then you've got 2 semesters of actual writing, then a final semester, I think, of or was it even, it might have been that final semester, might have been that last piece of that 1 year piece where you're actually defending your dissertation as well. So let's talk about that defending the dissertation piece a little bit as well. Why do you have to defend a dissertation, Frank?
Well, most most defenses are in front of a usually your mentor, so they're already familiar with your work because they've been alongside you these number of years as you've been writing, and really that is what it takes for the most part, at least several years to write this length of research. But there's usually at least your mentor and another reader or two. So these are other people, academics who have PhDs of their own, probably in the same field in which you're studying. So they have read through your dissertation. They get the gist of what you're proposing in your thesis, how well you may have supported that, whether you've gone to enough, whether you've reached out to enough research to back up your point, or perhaps you've not addressed some opposing views to your thesis, that kind of thing. So they're utilizing their own expertise in that field, and so now you're presenting your work before them, and they're going to evaluate it and ask you questions about it, and see if you know your business, essentially. If they see a gap in your research, they'll ask you, why is there a gap? I see a gap here. Is this something you overlooked, or is this something you intentionally knew or discovered is not relevant? That kind of thing. So they're part of the honing and polishing process. It's not, they call it a defense, and sometimes you feel like, oh, they're here to beat me up, but they're not. They've been through all this process too, by the way. So they are there because they have a passion and a commitment to the academic field in which they have a specialty, and you're about to enter that realm with them, and so they want to make sure that you have your ducks in a row, and you make an argument that's coherent, that can withstand other scrutiny from outside that particular institution, and so that's really what the defense is. And many times you may have to respond to the gaps that are found, questions, areas that need more research, and so you may have to go back and fill those holes in, and that's good,
Yeah.
because you do want to present your best work.
Yeah. Normally, a dissertation is publishable. That's the idea of it, as valid academic work. So having these. So what happens is the defense, they will read through your draft. They will sit down with you and talk through the areas that they have found strengths and weaknesses in, particularly weaknesses, really, the way it turns out, because that's really where you need to focus. And then they will make recommendations or suggestions about, first of all, is this up to standard, right? I mean, you probably won't get to this stage if it's not, because your supervisor will block it before you get to that point. But nonetheless, they're going to look at, is this up to the academic standards that we require for our school, or as academics ourselves, or both. And then you have the opportunity, normally, because you're sitting down, you have the opportunity to discuss these things with them. So that clarifies things. And then normally there's some fine tuning of your dissertation afterwards. At least that they will either say you need to change this in your dissertation, or they will say you don't need to change this, but these are questions that we have. I didn't have any significant changes to make, but I've heard of people who have had to rewrite significant sections of their dissertation as a result of that defense process. I had to fine-tune. There was actually one area in my defense where we had a good discussion about mysticism, its nature, and that kind of thing. And they didn't require me to change anything, but as I thought about it afterwards, I thought, I could change that and talk more about dualism and make a distinction between dualism and mysticism, which probably would have been helpful. But nonetheless, they didn't require it of me, so I didn't do it. So anyway, but that's the purpose of it. And once you've done that, then it's just a matter of final putting it back to your supervisor. They will be happy with any process. If you needed to update things, they will let you know. If you need to go through the defense process again, sometimes you do. Normally that means you extend for another semester. but that's also possible. And then your supervisor, if he's happy, then it's just a matter of going through the final formatting, which itself is grueling, and then getting the sign off so that you're finished with the dissertation. So that's normally the process from that point onwards. And I guess, Frank, since you're ABD, that's the piece you're looking forward to, right?
Oh yes, yes, absolutely. That I'm looking forward to getting to that point, right? Because that tells me that my research and my the bulk of my writing is complete.
Mm.
So at that point, I'm more than happy to address overlooked areas or fill in some holes because the bulk of the work at that point should be done.
Mm. So, did you want to talk a little bit about the process of writing?
I did. So one of the things I've come across in my dissertation process, because I'm in that writing slash research process, is devoting how much of each worked for you. I know this probably isn't going to fit everybody the same way, but did you do a lot of research first and then you kind of gathered everything together and started writing about all of that research? Or did you do it piecemeal, chapter by chapter? What was your experience?
Yeah, so for me, because I was doing biblical spirituality at the same time, that gave me this wonderful opportunity. My dissertation was on essentially, this is not the title of the dissertation, but it was on the intersection of the doctrine of union with Christ and marriage. And it ended up being essentially a theology of marriage, which I don't think has really been done. Maybe the closest thing was the things that I was refuting, marriage as a covenant. But so what I did for because I was doing biblical spirituality seminars, I was able to do a lot of work, and there was a huge focus in those seminars on union with Christ. So that allowed me to do a lot of research and writing around the subject of union with Christ and theosis and some of those related concepts while I was going through that seminar phase. From a biblical counseling point of view, I only had one seminar on family counseling during my seminar period, and it was probably not. It was okay. It was useful, but a lot of the research I did on marriage from that point was really just me in my own time, reading books and looking through, and also books that I did back in my undergraduate degree as well that were much more common for biblical counseling. So I kind of, and then yeah, and then there was the theological element of covenants and how that fitted into marriage as a covenant. And so I did a lot of work around that as well. Some of that drew from my master's degree, but a lot of that, again, was just me reading and finding the works that I was refuting and reading through those, understanding the argument, understanding those. So essentially, for me, the process itself was, here's the subject I'm working on for this chapter. What do I need to make sure I cover for that? Read, write, read, write, read, write, and then refine. And that was kind of the process. So I would read a little bit, I would write a little bit in response to that, depending on the flow of the chapter. And so the flow of the chapter that I'd already submitted to my supervisor then became the framework that I would then use for the reading and the writing. And so I would read a little bit and write a little bit every day, and that would be kind of the way I would work through it. So at that stage, that was very early as I was starting what's now Biblical Mastery Academy. And so I was really able to just focus my mornings for the most part on dissertation, and then I would work on, having some money to actually pay bills in the afternoon. Although it was not always that consistent. It sounds more ideal than it really probably was. It seemed a bit chaotic at the time, and it probably was. So that was a process I worked through. So I had some material already prepackaged from previous degrees. Some of it was building out as I was doing the writing, and some of it was included in the doctoral process as well. How did it work for you so far?
Yeah, so far I'm taking a chapter by chapter approach to it. So I do it similar to what you're talking about. I research that particular area. And then I write. I try to capture my thoughts that I've just because of the recent reading, and then I try to capture that. Now, a lot of my chapters in my dissertation, because I'm doing an analysis type of dissertation on a biblical book. So for those books, I'm running the actual text, the Hebrew text of that book, through the analysis process that I've already defined. And so that's a verse by verse or pericope by pericope process of running those through. So there's a little bit less research in those areas, and it's more like, since I've already set up what we're going to be analyzing here, here's the analysis of this verse or this group of verses, and then to kind of to reveal what does that show for that. And then so over and over, with each chapter being a different section of the scripture that I'm analyzing. So because of the nature of my dissertation being an analysis, the meat of the middle of the dissertation is not so much what all these other books say about this topic, but here's how this biblical Hebrew, once subjected to this analysis, what conclusions come from it. So,
okay, interesting. Yeah, cool. Anything else you wanted to add in about this process?
not that comes to mind. No, I appreciate the time and your sharing with how you got to where you are today, how that process went for you. Because for someone who's in the middle of that creative research process right now, I think it's very valuable to be able to get the story of those who have been through the process and what worked for them, what didn't work for them. It may not always be directly applicable, depending on your topic of your dissertation and the nature of it and that kind of thing. But the whole process of going through that PhD dissertation writing process, I think knowing how you did it, it would help me do it. And that's really what prompted me to kind of start asking you questions about this.
Yeah, no, that's great. Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, hey, thank you, Frank. It's been great. I always enjoy catching up. And I look forward to seeing your finished dissertation. Not sure if we'll get to read it, but I look forward to seeing you finish the dissertation. That's probably what I'm meaning to say.
I am too, yes.
Yeah. And seeing it finally laid up in the Library of Congress. Wouldn't that be fun? Yeah. So the dissertation process, as you can see, is actually quite involved. It is one of the most challenging elements of doing a PhD. It's harder in many ways than all of the seminars and colloquiums and other things that you might end up doing in a doctoral program. And it's certainly very vigorously and rigorously defended. You have to be very careful when you're thinking through your arguments and creating the paper itself. It does take a long time. 18 months is pretty short for a dissertation. As we mentioned, the European model can take all 3 years for the dissertation process. So it is quite an involved process, and it does mean that you have to really earn your salt in research. But I hope this has been helpful for you. If you're interested in learning the biblical languages, you don't have to go and do a PhD like we did to be able to learn those things. You can actually just learn from scratch with us, or you can carry on from where you learned in seminary, be it master's degree or whatever it was, and we will take you all the way so that you're able to read the New Testament fluently without having to rely on any tools. If you're interested in that, hit the link just here, bma.to/starterpack, download our free starter pack, and we'll look forward to getting you started. Thanks again for watching this video. I look forward to serving you again in the future. In the meantime, keep taking small, consistent steps toward mastery. We'll see you there.